Hello, minders. Welcome back to the Mind of Watercolor. Well, today I thought what we would do is a ink and wash, a line and wash, ink and wash. There's so many ways you can do it. I've demonstrated several. Anywhere from like the Pigma Micron type pens to, oh my goodness, fountain pens if you put a waterproof ink in it. Well, even if you don't, and you can kind of make a wash out of the ink. But combining ink with watercolor, or a line with watercolor. The reason I say line is because you can do pencil, you can do colored pencil. The most common is ink and wash, or line and wash with ink pens, and permanent ink at that. And that's what we're going to be doing today. You know how it is sometimes when you buy art supplies that you thought you were going to use and you wanted to experiment with, and they get stuck away and you forget about them. That's what I'm going to be reviving today and making a video out of. So I guess it's been at least 3 years now. I bought these Liquitex muted inks.
I forgot that you existed.
Raw umber, muted violet, muted gray, and you can't see this one, but it's muted green. This one was my favorite, the muted gray. It's actually violet. Let me show you the swatches. Here, I swatched them out, and you can see where I was experimenting a little bit. Inks, acrylic inks, and that's what these are acrylic inks. You can paint with them just like watercolor. The only difference is as soon as they dry, you can't do anything else with them. They're permanent. And of these inks, this was my favorite. It's called muted gray, but it's actually a grayed violet. Very definite violet color. I thought that'd be perfect for a line and wash. So that's what I'm going to use today. And you don't need these Liquitex inks to do this. You can use black India ink. Winsor Newton makes a nice line of inks. FW, which is I think a De La Rowney product, makes a nice line of acrylic inks. Or of course you can use any other permanent ink pen you want. But I am going to be using acrylic inks and a dip pen. I'm going to use this big Hunt. I think it's a 513. I'll have a link for it below. This is a large nib because it spreads a lot, so you get a lot of expressiveness. So I'll be using this for my line, but we're also gonna do a little bit of brush ink, and I want to talk about that as we go through the process. But let's get into this and see what we can do. All right, I think actually I will draw this out some. Being spontaneous with pen and ink is not always a great plan. Really, I'm just going through my Pinterest. I'm not going to copy any particular landscape. I'm just looking for a variety of shapes and woodland kind of elements that I can incorporate. Okay, that's given us some kind of a direction to head instead of just totally blank page. I'm going to focus my center of interest in here and see what we end up with. All right, so the muted gray, and we're going to start out with, as I mentioned, the dip pen. This is the Hunt 513 EF. Sometimes there's pigment in these acrylic inks that settles at the bottom, and I just get a stick. It's similar to a craft stick but thinner, and stir it and shake it real good. I like that these have eyedroppers. I prefer the inks that have eyedroppers, especially for dip pens, because I like to load dip pens with an eyedropper rather than actually dip them. Like this, basically. Just lay a line of ink right there, and you're good to go. All right. Let's get this tree in first. I'm going to make it real expressive and wiry. So that's what I love about this particular nib, is how varied and how flex you can make the line. And yet you've got almost a crow quill like fineness if you want it. So it's a great inking nib. Be careful not to fill your nib too much, or it may drip on your work. A lot of times when I'm drawing a branch, whether it's pencil or brush or ink, I will draw one side of it as if it's a very thin branch, and then go back and fill in the other side. Just an easier way. See, that line there may stay that thickness, that branch, or I could add a little thickness towards the base. Then I can throw in my thinner branches. I'll come back. I just want to establish some of the rest of this scene. Get in a little bit of underbrush maybe. Let's pop in our rock, or some of the rocks. Work on our landforms a little bit. I'm on a pretty good angle on my easel. Sometimes that affects the feed. I do that just for video more than anything, and because I don't like to look down on my work, hurts my neck. So sometimes I have to turn it this way to make sure that ink feeds down. I think that's going to be my basic composition and array of elements. Now what I want to do is just get in there and add some darker contrast. Keeping in mind all of this ink is permanent, waterproof, and will not be affected by the washes that go on top of it. But I do want to kind of make this an underpainting of sorts and add these dark areas. A lot of times shading can take on the form of whatever it is you're shading, not necessarily like straight hatching. So, you know, if you're drawing a facet to a rock, then you can kind of line some shadows in with lines that match that contour. Same with underbrush or foliage on the shadow side. I mean, you can add these shapes. You want to simplify it, you know, not a lot of leaves and grassy things, but on the shadow side, you know, just make it more dense. This is actually my first time ever using these Liquitex inks. So I have been curious, and they've literally have sat on my desk off to the side for over 3 years. Oh boy.
Let's face it, the hoard is a byproduct, is a symptom of the person's mind.
Don't you judge me. There are many of you out there to do the same thing. You know it. Oh, there we go. There's the big problem. We're going to have to figure out what's going to go there. Just tone that area to loosen up. Hasn't had a chance to dry much. Once I get some washes on this, and this area here is going to have to be kind of dark. You won't see it much. Put some water on that before it has a chance to set in. I'm pretty happy, I think, with the line work. So what we're going to do is some underpainting with ink. And this is kind of what I was really excited to do. Little porcelain palettes like this are great for ink. Even after they dry, they wash off of porcelain with hot water. I'm going to lay my easel back a little bit. Then I'm just going to put out a little bit of ink on the palette. And you can use this exactly like watercolor. I take a brush. This is just a cheap Golden Taklon brush. I don't use my good watercolor brushes. Just start against any ink drying in the brush. But just a little water. You can thin it out with water. Thin it to whatever value you want, just like watercolor. This is going to provide a valued underpainting. You can use light tone or dark tone, as I mentioned. And I really am wanting to center some interest there. And I may go back and detail some branches in there after I've actually done the watercolor, which will come next. I usually shoot for a nice pen and ink piece that would almost stand alone if I didn't add any color. And you'll see that what happens is, here you can see I'm blending this ink out just like watercolor. When I get to the watercolor, you'll see it'll go really fast. And here where I dropped the ink, let's go ahead and tone that entire area. I'm going to go ahead and tone some of the facets in these rocks. Just a really fun, quick way to do some interesting watercolor. And I'd really like to try this with that raw umber. And how much you do this with the toning is totally up to you also. I'm actually putting in a good bit, and I'm trying to hit, again, just the darkest spots. You can go back over your line. You want to like bold it up with your brush and do some linear work with the brush. Just don't get too carried away. All right, I think I'm going to let that thoroughly dry, and then we're going to come back and watercolor it. Okay, the ink is good and dry. And I debated on whether to pre-wet this, but I think what I'm going to do is spot spray it. So there'll be some wet and wet. I'm going to go in with some light color first. This part here is pretty spontaneous, and it's sort of a place and react kind of a thing for me. You know, put some down, see what I like, add something else. I'm going to stay faint and light. It can always get darker. I think I'm pretty happy with that. I may tweak it a little more, but we're going to go let this completely dry now, and then I'm going to go work on the fine limbs of the tree. We may even come back into some of the ink areas and strengthen those. All right, that's totally dry now, bone dry. I'm going to go back in and do some more ink work on top of that, now that we have the washes down. I like to keep washes light in line and wash. That's just my preference. I like the ink work to show through because that's where your detail is. And I don't try to get too dark, maybe just in a few spots with the watercolor. Just going to strengthen that line and those shadows in places with some ink. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. I'll probably stare at it a bit and maybe make a few tweaks here and there, but by and large, I think that's gonna get it. And that's a nice, quaint little scene, I think. But I hope you see how easy this is. By all means, draw something out in pencil more carefully if you're not comfortable with being as spontaneous with these forms as I am. Make sure you get plenty of contrast in there with the ink and light with your washes, except maybe in a few shadow spots. But it's quick. I mean, you saw how quickly this went. And just have fun with it. All right, thank you very much. I appreciate you watching. I'm going to do another one for patrons. So patrons, you look for that in the future and give it a try. If you have something just as simple as a Pigma Micron, you can do this. You don't need a dip pen. You don't need colored inks. Or if you have some India ink, if you don't want it to be so black, you can thin it out a little bit. So lots of ways you can try this. And I do thank you so much, patrons, for your support of this channel. We'll see everybody in the next video. Bye-bye.